The Cold War began in the aftermath of World War II, which ended in 1945. The geopolitical landscape shifted dramatically as the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's two dominant superpowers. With Europe devastated and economies in ruins, these nations found themselves at odds over differing ideologies. The United States, advocating for capitalism and democracy, contrasted sharply with the Soviet Union's commitment to communism and state control. This ideological divide set the stage for decades of tension and conflict. As both superpowers sought to expand their influence globally, the world witnessed a series of confrontations and alliances that defined a new era. The Cold War was not just a military standoff, it was a battle of ideas, shaping international relations and the lives of millions across the globe. In March 1946, Winston Churchill delivered his iconic Iron Curtain speech at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. This address marked a pivotal moment in the early Cold War, as it vividly illustrated the stark ideological divide between the Western democracies and the Eastern Communist bloc led by the Soviet Union. Churchill famously declared that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, symbolizing the separation of free nations from those under Soviet influence. The speech resonated deeply as it called for a united response from the West to counter the growing threat of communism. By emphasizing the need for solidarity among Western nations, Churchill's words galvanized public opinion and laid the groundwork for future alliances, ultimately shaping the geopolitical landscape of the Cold War era. His insights remain relevant in understanding the enduring tensions between East and West. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was established as a collective defense alliance primarily aimed at countering potential Soviet aggression. The formation of NATO was a direct response to the growing tensions in Europe following World War II, where the threat of communism loomed large. The alliance was founded on the principle that an attack against one member would be considered an attack against all, thereby ensuring mutual defense among its members. This collective security arrangement significantly impacted global politics by solidifying the divide between the Western powers and the Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union. NATO not only provided military support, but also fostered political unity among its member states, shaping international relations and strategies during the Cold War and influencing future alliances and conflicts around the world. In the aftermath of World War II, tensions escalated between the United States and the Soviet Union, culminating in the Berlin Blockade from June 1948 to May 1949. The Soviet Union aimed to consolidate control over East Berlin by cutting off all ground access to the city, hoping to force the Western Allies out. In response, the United States and its allies initiated the Berlin Airlift, a monumental operation that supplied West Berliners with food, fuel, and essential goods. Over the course of nearly 11 months, aircraft delivered more than 2 million tons of supplies, showcasing Western commitment to countering Soviet aggression. This operation not only exemplified the growing divide, but also solidified the United States' role as a protector of democracy in Europe, setting the stage for further Cold War confrontations. The Korean War, spanning from 1950 to 1953, marked the first significant proxy conflict of the Cold War. Following the division of Korea into North and South at the end of World War II, tensions escalated when North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea in June 1950. In response, the United States, under the banner of the United Nations, intervened to support South Korea, viewing the invasion as a direct threat to democracy and freedom. This conflict showcased the stark ideological divide, with the United States championing capitalism and democracy, while the Soviet Union supported communism and authoritarianism. The war ultimately solidified the Cold War dynamics, as both superpowers sought to expand their influence, leading to a protracted and bloody stalemate that would define the Korean peninsula for decades. The arms race of the 1950s and 1960s marked a pivotal chapter in the Cold War, characterized by the fierce competition between the United States and the Soviet Union to develop nuclear weapons. Following World War II, both superpowers sought to amass arsenals capable of deterring each other, leading to an unprecedented escalation in military capabilities. The hydrogen bomb, introduced by the United States in 1952, intensified the rivalry, prompting the Soviet Union to successfully test its own version a year later. This relentless pursuit of nuclear superiority created an atmosphere of paranoia and fear, as each nation aimed to outdo the other. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction emerged, where both sides recognized that any nuclear conflict would lead to catastrophic consequences, further entrenching the ideological divide and shaping international relations for decades to come. The space race began in earnest with the launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union on October 4, 1957. This monumental event marked the first time a human-made object orbited the Earth, igniting a wave of national pride in the Soviet Union while sending shockwaves through the United States. The implications were profound. The successful launch showcased Soviet technological prowess and raised concerns about U.S. security. American leaders recognized that the space race was not merely about exploration, but a reflection of ideological superiority. In response, the United States ramped up its own space efforts, leading to the establishment of NASA in 1958. The competition spurred rapid advancements in technology and education, emphasizing the importance of science and engineering. Ultimately, the race to the stars became a pivotal aspect of the Cold War, shaping the future of both nations. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 marked the peak of nuclear tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. The crisis began when American reconnaissance flights discovered Soviet nuclear missile sites being constructed in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. This revelation sparked a 13-day standoff, as President John F. Kennedy and his advisors debated how to respond. The world held its breath as the possibility of nuclear war loomed large. Kennedy ultimately chose a naval blockade, or quarantine, to prevent further shipments of military equipment to Cuba. After intense negotiations, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev agreed to dismantle the missile sites in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba and the secret removal of American missiles from Turkey. The resolution of this crisis became a pivotal moment in Cold War history, highlighting the need for communication and diplomacy. The Vietnam War, spanning from 1955 to 1975, became a focal point of contention during the Cold War. As U.S. involvement escalated, so did public dissent. Protests erupted across the nation, fueled by the perception that the war was unjust and costly. Activists, students, and veterans rallied, demanding an end to the conflict. This widespread opposition significantly influenced U.S. foreign policy, compelling leaders to reconsider military strategies and withdrawal timelines. The media played a crucial role, broadcasting graphic images of the war, which shifted public opinion and heightened anti-war sentiments. The protests not only challenged government narratives, but also reshaped the perception of the Cold War itself, revealing deep divisions within American society. Ultimately, the Vietnam War and the protests surrounding it marked a pivotal moment in U.S. history, highlighting the power of public opinion in shaping foreign policy. The era of détente emerged in the late 1960s and continued into the 1970s, marked by a significant thaw in U.S.-Soviet relations. Central to this period were the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, commonly known as SALT, which aimed to curb the arms race between the superpowers. The first round of SALT negotiations began in 1969, leading to the SALT I agreement in 1972. This agreement limited the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine-launched ballistic missiles each side could possess. Another key aspect of détente was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which restricted missile defense systems. These agreements represented a mutual recognition of the catastrophic potential of nuclear war, fostering a climate where dialogue and negotiation could replace confrontation. Ultimately, détente was a crucial step in reducing tensions and promoting stability during a tumultuous period in history. The late 1970s and 80s marked a resurgence of Cold War tensions, primarily ignited by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December 1979. This aggressive move was perceived as a direct threat to Western interests and triggered widespread condemnation from the United States and its allies. In response, President Jimmy Carter implemented economic sanctions against the Soviet Union and boycotted the 1980 Moscow Olympics, signaling a renewed commitment to countering Soviet expansionism. The invasion also led to the United States increasing military support for Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen. Additionally, the deployment of intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Europe further escalated hostilities as both superpowers engaged in a renewed arms race. This period was characterized by heightened rhetoric and military posturing, solidifying the adversarial relationship that defined the Cold War era. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev emerged as pivotal leaders during the final years of the Cold War. Reagan, with his firm stance against communism, initially adopted a confrontational approach, emphasizing military strength and strategic defense initiatives. However, as he engaged in dialogue with Gorbachev, his perspective shifted towards diplomacy. Gorbachev, on the other hand, introduced transformative policies such as perestroika and glasnost, aiming to restructure the Soviet economy and promote openness in governance. These reforms signaled a departure from traditional Soviet practices and fostered a climate of dialogue. Their summits, particularly in Geneva and Reykjavik, showcased their willingness to negotiate arms reductions. This collaboration not only eased tensions, but also paved the way for a historic thaw in US-Soviet relations, ultimately contributing to the Cold War's resolution. The fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, marked a pivotal moment in history, symbolizing the end of the Cold War and the division of Europe. This concrete barrier had stood since 1961, physically and ideologically separating East and West Berlin, representing the broader conflict between the capitalist West and the communist East. Its dismantling signified not only the collapse of oppressive regimes in Eastern Europe, but also the triumph of democratic ideals. The event catalyzed the reunification of Germany and inspired movements for freedom across the continent. It illustrated the power of grassroots activism as citizens demanded change. The fall of the Berlin Wall became a powerful emblem of hope, unity, and the possibility of a new beginning, reshaping the geopolitical landscape and fostering a new era of cooperation in Europe. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a significant turning point in global politics, effectively bringing the Cold War to a close. This monumental event symbolized the collapse of a superpower that had long been a formidable opponent to the United States and its allies. The ideological battle between capitalism and communism that had defined decades of tension began to fade, leading to a new world order. The end of the Cold War not only reshaped Europe, but also influenced international relations as former Soviet states sought independence and redefined their identities. The lasting impact of this period can still be felt today as the geopolitical landscape continues to evolve. The lessons learned from this era remind us of the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and the pursuit of peace in an increasingly interconnected world. The Cold War was a complex period marked by significant events and themes that shaped global politics. It began with the ideological clash between capitalism and communism, leading to pivotal moments such as Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech and the formation of NATO. The Berlin Blockade and the Korean War underscored the intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The arms race and the space race highlighted technological competition, while the Cuban Missile Crisis represented the peak of nuclear tension. The Vietnam War and public protests revealed the impact of domestic opinion on foreign policy. Détente efforts aimed to ease hostilities, but renewed tensions emerged in the late 20th century. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union marked the Cold War's conclusion, inviting deeper exploration of its enduring legacy.